I want to do is really just go through the different parts of it. Of course, as you know, the 2011 recommendation came about thanks to Mike Francesco and other leaders who took it forward. This came about after almost a decade of work, really actually sort of in a very intensively from 2005 after the Vienna Memorandum, when this idea of really looking at the urban issues and seeing how the urban could be really brought out more specifically in looking at heritage, so that the approach to urban heritage was not the same as looking at buildings. So there has been a tendency, and I'm afraid I'm talking 10 years later, there is still this tendency to look at, when we talk to site managers, to city authorities, they either think of historic cities as big monuments or as a few monuments to be taken care of within the city, forgetting the city as a whole, but just focusing on those few monuments. So the concept of what is urban heritage and how is that different from monuments, and looking at conservation as a differently than physical conservation, but looking at conservation more in terms of planning and regulations and governance. This has been a huge shift. And I'm not sure that everybody is with us in this shift, but we're certainly trying very hard to make that shift and get everybody on board with it. So what we, for those of you who may or may not be, I don't know, some of this may be redundant. Stop me if everybody is fully on board with HUL. I know that several of you have been founding partners, so you may find this tedious, but I'll just run through it quickly. So the idea of the 2011 recommendation is that the built heritage, the communities and their intangible heritage, the natural elements, the context, the natural features in which the heritage sits, the universal values, the outstanding universal values of the globally significant heritage, the small local heritage, which are all different layers, different aspects of the same, are all integrated together in urban heritage, and that you cannot really look at them separately, but they have to be understood as an ecosystem altogether. There's a little clip here that we have made as an introduction. I'm just going to run through it. Stop me if it is something that you all know very well. Can you hear it? If you're having trouble hearing, let me know.
We can't hear it.
You cannot hear it. Okay, let me try one more time. If not, we'll skip it. So let me try to, I think when I choose to go in here.
Sorry, you have to share the sound as well. If you
I
have a
know, but it
small,
should automatically.
not in the Zoom. Zoom, you have to share both.
Okay, so I'm going to skip it because I'm not being able to. I don't know. Myrna is online. Myrna, do you know how to make the sound? Share the sound? No, we're not getting a way to share the sound. Okay, so I'm going to stop this if I can. It seems to be still going on, so I'm going to stop for a second. I'm not sure where it's going, but it's still. Okay, I'm just 1 second. Okay, I think it stopped. So let me. Okay. All right, now I think we're back and it's okay. So let me share it again. Okay, so the World Heritage Cities program is really around the historic urban landscape recommendation, because the states parties, the UNESCO member states and the states parties of the 1972 convention, where we have more than 230 historic towns, cities, different sizes, settlements inscribed as World Heritage cities are, I mean, they have really been inscribed as either the whole city or part of the city. And I'm sorry, 330. So there's more than 330 of these towns. So the management, that's almost a third of the entire list. The World Heritage list is 1,233 properties. And if nearly 330, more than 330 are World Heritage cities, you can imagine that's a very large proportion. Many of the, so we have three ways in which we look at them. There may be cities that have their own, that are either the whole city or that could be a part of a city. It could also be a monument that is very integrally related to the setting. So those are all the different ways. And it is one, so in 2001, the World Heritage Cities program was established as one of the 6 thematic programs that was monitored by the World Heritage, that is monitored by the World Heritage Committee, so we report to them. And the idea was to assist the states parties in protecting and managing urban heritage. And then this cities program was the basis, was the where the 2011 recommendation was born, because this took forward several meetings and organized workshops and international meetings to be able to take forward the development of the instrument, the 2011 recommendation. So the relationship between World Heritage and the 2011 recommendation is very close. So a lot of the work we have done is in part around World Heritage, but in part around all historic towns and cities. So in a sense, it is aimed at all historic towns, settlements, but we prioritize working on World Heritage because that's there's a real need. That's what states are asking us to do, and because that's where that connection has been fundamental. So over the last few years, since 2018, we have organized more than 11 major international workshops. And these have been very important in being peer, what we call a peer-to-peer learning and a co-creation environment, because what we found was that it was not adequate simply to reach out to major experts or academic institutions. It was really important to bring site managers together, because otherwise there were solutions being generated that the site managers considered too distant, too impractical, too theoretical. And if we just asked the site managers, they felt stymied by all the different blocks that they felt they were encountering. So it was very important to bring these groups together. So what we finally arrived at was a need where we saw that decision-making for urban heritage conservation and management needed knowledge, tools, guidance, and practices. And that's really what we focused on a lot. As an outcome of these more than 11 international workshops, one of the things that we really focused on developing was also a set of you might say a framework of sorts, because along the way, because every 6 months we report to the executive board of UNESCO, which is the member states of UNESCO, and they give us feedback. And one of the things that we were given feedback, or rather 2 different things, and then we also report to the World Heritage Committee. So between these 2 different governing bodies, we were asked to align the HUL recommendation very closely with the with sustainable development, the 2030 agenda, on the one hand, and with climate action and resilience on the other. So we took these, obviously, we took this on board, and then we also have to report to the executive board every 4 years. We do a consultation with all the member states. So and then ask them about how they're implementing this instrument. And we take this information that they provide us and develop a synthetic response or a synthetic summary, a consolidated summary. So what we did was, the last one that we did was in 2022-23, and we completely revamped the questionnaire to a framework that integrated the key, as we saw, as the key thematics of the HUL recommendation. So the first issue is around governance mechanisms and planning to protect urban heritage. So what kind of mechanisms do countries, cities have? The second, because in a lot of countries, they think they have the laws, but they actually don't, or their laws are more geared towards monuments and not towards urban. The second was understanding and inventorying multiple layers of urban heritage, because one of the things we found was that many of the people responsible on the ground are really looking at archaeology, or they're looking at monuments, physical conservation, as I said. So this being able to understand the multiple layers of urban heritage was not something. They really didn't understand what had to be protected. They didn't see why was UNESCO concerned about individual old houses that collapsed, or why was UNESCO asking them about public spaces, because they didn't see these as connected. And the concept of what a facade is was really foggy for a lot of people. So, and when I say people, I mean mostly people, the responsibles from the different countries, because that's whom we're trying to target this at. And then, so the integration of participatory processes, inclusion, local communities, which is fundamental to the way the HUL recommendation is in managing urban heritage, is another thematic. And then looking at economic benefits, fourth one. And then finally, advancing sustainable development and climate resilience, as well as looking at capacity building. So this report is available online and could be of interest. So using all of this, what we learned from these 11 meetings, as I said, they were really huge meetings, because one of those meetings was over 4 days of regional meetings, and then a final international workshop that was high level with mayors and so on. So there's, it really consists of multiple meetings within meetings, but each had conclusions. And so what came out, and you'll find the reports on our website, what came out of all of this, synthesizing all of this, was the need for certain tools. And one of the things that we started to do was to look at integrating good practices on the one hand, which we didn't call good practices, but call them innovative practices, and a platform for supporting the implementation of the HUL recommendation, first and foremost through inventorying, but also as a way to demonstrate what it is that historic towns and cities are about. And so this platform, and thirdly, that also talks about cultural mapping and being able to understand how to map culture. So the Urban Heritage Atlas was launched last year, and the main purpose of this was to be able to provide a kind of an atlas, really, of all types of urban heritage. We did 10 as a pilot, and that's what is up online at the moment. And we've done a few more and have a few in the pipeline that should be coming up. So when you go into this, you find, and these represent all different regions. The primary thing that we did was to develop an approach, a methodology, where you look at the city at 3 scales, and then a fourth, let's say 4 dimensions. The first is the distinctive So what we're trying to capture is the distinctive character, the overall distinctive character of a historic urban area or a historic landscape. And the first aspect has to do at the scale of historic buildings, because this is the most tangible one that people can relate to. You look at the monuments, you can map the monuments down, you have something usually in the statement of outstanding universal value that you can look at. Then after the monuments, you can look at the ordinary houses and start to also include traditional buildings, ordinary houses into this. And you can go in and see it live. I'm just taking you through static slides, but you can see this live on the online. The second scale is at the scale of the urban elements, which captures the key distinctive aspects of public spaces, large and small, going from major plazas to small community spaces, streets that may be, large major arteries or small little residential alleyways. They could be also gardens or waterways. It depends on what there is in that town. And then is the trickiest one, which is the wider context. It's the trickiest because that's what seems to be the most difficult for our audience, who are typically, as I said, the authorities of the national local authorities, to really comprehend what is this distinctive, what is this wider context, and are we going far beyond the city? But being able to look at its natural setting, but also, historic cities and settlements could be part of a bigger conglomerate or a bigger urban area, and being able to see, as in the case of metropolitan centers, the historic core is just very small and is connected to a larger. So how does that sit, and how does that influence and shape what happens in it, and what does that that section look like? And then is the core of the mapping itself, which we do at 3 levels, as you can see in this example of Cordoba in Spain, and you can see this live if you go in, but let me see if I can get the video to work. So what you can see is that, if you go in, you have a number of different categories. And then if you click on any one of them, you can go in and see what you can put in photographs. They can have, depending on what the cities decide to provide, you can see a variety of different elements. There you saw a procession. So even the intangible aspects can be included and mapped onto the GIS. And this means that, there is kind of one comprehensive database where, and these are only some of the layers. They can always add additional layers so that you can see what aspects have to be protected as part of the OUV, or the outstanding universal value in the case of World Heritage Cities. But there may be other things which are not part of that narrative, but are still very important to protect. For example, these watermills in Cordoba are not part of the narrative of the World Heritage Statement of Outstanding Universal Value, but they're still really precious to retain, and the whole water system. So, those are decisions that can be made. And it's once you have it on GIS and it's up online, it's very publicly available. It means that the city can, the citizens, the residents of the city can contribute to the development of this this mapping, as well as benefit from it, because once it's there, if any new project is proposed, one can, within the historic part, one can easily see, anyone can easily see what, where it's located and what it's likely to impact, what could be the way that what needs to be considered, if it's right in the path of a procession, for example, what would be its impact, etc. So this allows the new development to be better, made more compatible. And so you can see these at different scales, as pointed out, and there are different periods that you can, it depends what categories you want to put, but this is essentially the way it's done. And, we have many examples. This is the one for Xur in Mauritania. I'm not going to go into it, but it includes sections of traditional houses, the traditional construction techniques and materials, because this also is a way of reviving it, or the way that it sits within the natural landscape and it responds to, in this case, a fairly arid region, and how that it is able to respond to the hydrological or the hydrological situation or the terrain, and the intangible heritage dimensions are all included. This is the town of Jenne, so I'm going to stop with those examples for it. So essentially, as an accompaniment with this, and as a way, you could say that the Urban Heritage Atlas accompanies a guide, or the guidance accompanies the Urban Heritage Atlas, either way. Well, we can do the mapping, but once you do the mapping, the question is, how do you actually protect each of these aspects? So if you're looking at a street pattern, or you're looking at a public space, now you've identified it, and you've identified that you have large public spaces and small ones, you have big streets and small ones. How do you go about actually protecting it? So the guidance is based on, again, a number of those many expert workshops that I mentioned to you. We had developed this idea of working towards a guidance, which has been ongoing since 2019. We have had a number of different initiatives towards it, and even before. So what we have synthesized now is essentially a methodology that looks at 5 key steps. The first is mapping the distinctive character of the historic urban landscape, which is what I just showed you. The second is looking at the governance mechanisms for managing the historic urban landscape. So this could include governance at different levels. The third is looking at planning and design, and looking at planning and design in the historic landscape, historic urban landscape, which involves looking on the one hand at guidelines and regulations. But these guidelines and regulations can be at different levels. So it could be in terms of the building design guidelines, which means you first study what the existing and traditional patterns might be, or the historic buildings patterns might be, and then develop the guidance accordingly. Or it could be for urban design guidelines, which is looking again at what kinds of streets and plot sizes and volumes, heights exist, and therefore what should be the guidance for how do you decide what kind of maximum height or maximum volume, or so how do you decide those envelopes? So it gives guidance on that. And then there's a guidance also on looking at sustainable development, focusing on inclusion, economic and social inclusion, and then focusing one on climate action, nature, and resilience, looking also at the natural nature-based solutions or others. And then there are 2 additional guides. One is on planning for regeneration and adaptive reuse in urban contexts, and the other is recovery and reconstruction. These are different because, in a sense, if you've done the sort of basic 5, then you are you're ready to go to actually more project-based. And this is more project-based, and you look at partners and where's the funds coming from and how you do it. And each of these guides have tools that go with it that are digital tools, and that are going to be on the Urban Heritage Atlas. They're not yet there. We're in the midst of drafting and finalizing the set of tools. And once they're all approved, they will all be operable from the Urban Heritage Atlas and can help implement. So I'm just going to skip and keep going on looking at climate change, just to run quickly through this. The fact that I think everybody is familiar with the 2023 policy document on climate action for World Heritage that took us 7 years. Not us, but it was the member states debated a lot on it, and there were several expert meetings, but eventually this has been adopted. So it's a major milestone for us. And now we're looking at how to really disseminate it and integrate it into the different activities. And a climate action toolkit is currently being developed together with the advisory bodies, ICOMOS, IUCN, and ICROM. And of course, climate change is really impacting cities in particular among all the world. All the World Heritage properties, it's the most significant issue today. But when you look at cities, it's particularly so because historically, I would say 90% of cities are coastal, and a variety of our World Heritage cities, I think more than 40% are along ocean coasts or along rivers, etc. So they're really more vulnerable to the impacts. One of the things, as I said, initially we were looking at good practices because this was something that was asked of us is, okay, so all of this is good, well and good, but how can we actually take action on the ground? All of this sustainable development, climate discourse is up here, and how do we bring it down to the ground? So what we developed was this platform of good practices that we don't call good practices because we're not really assessing them for being good. Rather, they're more like interesting or innovative practices that could serve as examples for others. And they're inspiring examples. Here, for instance, is an example where they're promoting traditional environmental knowledge in the Mazhab Valley in Algeria, where all of these villages that have been living pretty much the same way of life since the 11th century and use the same traditional building techniques have been suffering a lot of problems because they have been having a lot of overflow of their water canals, or they've had drought. So they've been suffering a lot from either excessive water or too little water, and the water it seems like the periodic sort of management, they had a periodic overflow of water, which was a very controlled kind of overflow that wasn't working anymore. And the floodable areas near the river were occupied by temporary structures, and there was a problem that they were finding. So one of the things that was undertaken was a way by which they revived these traditional practices of water management, which they had before, because they found that way of dealing with controlled flooding could actually be a very important way to manage the water problems in that area, and allowing certain amount of seepage enable the drought conditions to be counteracted against. So this became a very important kind of example. We have several such examples, as for example, also in the case of Hue in Vietnam, where the water basins, the water retention basins are very, very important around the lakes and are used to irrigate agricultural fields. So this relationship between the urban and the rural hinterland, along with the water systems, is part of the story. So we're trying to say that it's all part of the same story and not try to separate them so much. Because that really is part of the solutions. So we're looking to use these case studies. Here is a case we are also looking, for example, at Lamu. And so if you look at Lamu, again, they're having a lot of problems because of flooding, across in some of the areas. And it, even though it's a very important trading port, it has been affected since the last decade with a lot of tides that are causing periodic flooding on the seafront, and it's adversely affecting all of the buildings. And so the volume of water is so high that it comes over walls. So they've tried to build walls, and it doesn't really work. And what was then identified was that the problem was mangroves and the destruction of mangroves. So UNESCO, and all of these are projects where UNESCO has been involved, where the destruction of mangroves had exacerbated the problem because they served as a natural defense against the strong winds and the tsunamis. And this could be easily countered by encouraging the mangroves to grow, and this became also community activity, etc. So I want to finish with the last thing, which is on non-economic losses, because it's very important to recognize that now, for the first time, the climate discourse, you might say, and the climate community, which has so far really been focused on scientific data. They're still very focused on scientific data, but there has been a wedge in that culture has made, so that some places culture is recognized. And this is a really important recognition, because that enables culture to claim a space and be vocal about how important it is for addressing climate change. So there is a group under the UNFCCC, is the Warsaw Mechanism for the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, and they were so I'm involved with them. UNESCO worked to lead the part of this report, the part that focuses on cultural heritage, to really show how cultural heritage is impacted by climate change. First of all, to show cultural heritage doesn't mean one thing, but many different types of things, and that the loss and damage can be in multiple forms and often overlapping. And that when there is loss of cultural knowledge, it's not just about identity, but it is about the loss of cultural knowledge that has been accumulated over generations, or loss of skills related to local resources, livelihoods, traditional forms of governance systems. Even food security and water security are impacted. So the adaptation issues become really complex, and that means their resilience comes down. And so the loss of cultural heritage then ends up disproportionately impacting those communities, especially marginalized communities and indigenous peoples. So this publication then, was very well received by the UNFCCC, and we're now just launching work on a second publication, which is entirely dedicated to cultural heritage, to expand on this more. And most of the case studies for this have been drawn from World Heritage. So I'm going to stop there and see if you have any comments, questions. I think I've talked for a bit, so we'll take it from there. And I'm, of course, happy to elaborate on anything and explore further. Thank you very much.